Now that we've seen how Moses' creation account begins and ends, we should look at the middle portion of this passage, which describes how the tension between the chaotic world and God's hovering spirit was resolved. This passage teaches that God restrained the chaos by ordering the world according to a wondrous six-day plan described in chapter 1, verse 3 through 31. The central focus of this material becomes clear when we see that Moses repeatedly introduced the actions with the phrase, "and God said." This is because God is the main character of this material, and His powerful word is the focus of these verses. God's mere word brought magnificent order to the world. Unlike many mythological gods from other cultures, the God of Israel faced no struggles and no battles as He created. He simply spoke, and the world took its proper order. Beyond this, God's spoken word displayed His powerful wisdom. God put the world into the order that seemed best to Him. Many interpreters have recognized that the days of God's ordering creation fall into two sets of three, days 1 through 3 and days 4 through 6. The relationships between these two sets of days have been described in many ways, and there are multiple interconnections. One helpful way to introduce ourselves to these patterns is to draw upon the description of the earth in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2. You'll recall that Moses said that the earth was formless and empty, tohu vavohu. These terms may be used to explain the significance of the two sets of 3 days. On the one side, during the first 3 days, God dealt with the fact that the earth was formless. That is to say, He brought form to His creation by separating one area from another and shaping spheres or domains within His creation. On the other side, during the last 3 days, God dealt with the fact that the chaotic world was empty or void. God's solution was to fill up the various domains He had created with inhabitants. Think about the first 3 days. On day 1, God separated the domain of day from the night. Even before there was a sun, God caused light to shine in the darkness of the dark, chaotic world. On day 2, God separated the area of waters below and waters above by stretching a dome or firmament above the earth. This divine action caused what we now call the atmosphere of our planet, separating the water on earth from the moisture in the sky above. On day 3, God separated the territory of dry land from the seas. The oceans were gathered into regions of the earth, and the land appeared. Vegetation began to grow on the dry land. So it is that on the first 3 days, God brought form to a formless world. He erected the domains of light and darkness, the sky separating waters above and waters below, and the dry land of the earth. According to Moses' record, once God dealt with the formlessness of the earth by creating domains during the first 3 days, He then dealt with the emptiness of the earth in the last 3 days by placing inhabitants in these domains. On day 4, God placed the sun, moon, and stars in the heavens to fill up the domains of light and darkness which He had formed on the first day. These heavenly bodies were put in the sky to rule over the day and night and to keep them separate. On the 5th day, God placed birds in the air and sea creatures in the oceans. These inhabitants filled the domains of waters above and below, which had been formed on the 2nd day. Finally, on the 6th day, God placed animals and humanity on the dry land. These inhabitants filled up the domain of the dry land which God had caused to rise out of the sea on the 3rd day. Moses gathered the whole of creation into these domains and their inhabitants. In a word, God spent 6 days bringing a splendid order to the dark, chaotic world. His work was so wonderful that 6 times God said, "It is good." And after He made humanity to live on the dry land, He said, "It is very good." Moses made it very clear that God was wonderfully pleased with what He had done. So we see that Genesis chapter 1 verse 1 through chapter 2 verse 3 has a very intentional, complex structure. The passage begins with the world in chaos and God about to move upon it. For 6 days, God spoke order into the chaotic world. Consequently, on the seventh day, God delighted in the ideal order he had brought to the world, and he enjoyed his Sabbath rest.